We are a publisher of standards. We are the platform for creating standards, and we are the platform for distributing standards. I think it's important to understand that standards are not just documents, standards are knowledge. Standards are used by different industries and are used for different purposes. So sometimes standards are used just as a source of inspiration. Sometimes standards are used because you have to comply with the standards, and certification, for example. So there are different uses of standards, there are different kinds of standards. If I have a good team, I have more flexibility and I'm more relaxed in spending my time in what I need to spend. Trusting people makes sure that I can spend the time I need in the really areas that are needed for me.
This is CIONET TV. My name is Hendrik Deckers. I'm here today with Johan Haelterman, who is the chairman of the executive committee at NBN and a member of the ISO Council. A very warm welcome, Johan.
Thank you, Hendrik, and thank you, CIONET, for having me. Thank you.
Johan, you have a Master in Industrial Science from the Erasmus School in Brussels and a Master in Business Management from the VUB, also in Brussels. Your career has been all about IT. You worked for PwC in IT audit. You were a partner at Grant Thornton, and since 2012, you have been appointed as chairman of the executive committee at NBN. So, Johan, tell us a little bit more about yourself. Who are you really? And how did you arrive in this position?
Well, I started my career in '88 at IBM in the IT business, obviously, and had different jobs in the IT sector until I arrived at PricewaterhouseCoopers in a position of IT auditor. And from there on at PricewaterhouseCoopers, you do different stuff and you go more into, well, management-related activities like risk management, internal audit. And so hence I moved my career from IT towards more in business management, actually.
Okay. And so today you are leading NBN here in Belgium. So in 2 sentences, Johan, how would you describe NBN? What is it that this organization does?
We are a publisher of standards, right? We create the standards. We are the platform for creating standards, and we are the platform for distributing standards. I think it's important to understand that standards are not just documents, standards are knowledge. And what we actually do is capture the knowledge of experts in Belgium, worldwide, and make this knowledge available to companies, to industries. So actually, I would say we're not in the business of standards, we're in the business of knowledge management.
Okay, super. So standards, knowledge management, but let's call them standards.
Yeah, of course.
But as Simon Sinek would say, let's start with the why. Why are standards important in business and society today?
Standards have different benefits. First of all, standards are an agreed way of working, of doing things. That's important if companies want to work together. They define, for example, quality. They define, for example, safety. They define how things are tested, how things are produced. So in a value chain where companies work together, or even with administrations, it's important to have agreements. And actually a standard is an agreement on how to do things, how a product is defined, how a service is defined.
So it's a way so that companies and organizations can work well together in a safe way, in an optimal way, we could say. And so can you give us an example of what kind of standards and how many standards are there and what kind of standards are there available?
Interesting question. We have approximately 40,000 standards that are developed by experts around the globe. And standards are used by different industries, by many industries, and are used for different purposes. One of the reasons companies use standards actually is to get information to be inspired by getting access to best practices. So sometimes standards are used just as a source of inspiration. Sometimes standards are used because you have to comply with the standards. In certification, for example, ISO 27001, I think in the IT business is a well-known standard.
Yep.
So there are different uses of standards, there are different kinds of standards. So standards for certification, standards just for your use. So different ways of using standards.
So 40,000 different standards that you manage. So there must be many, many different categories. Is it about food safety? Is it about, traffic, industrial?
Everywhere, products, tiling, floor coverings, clothing, sizes of clothes, of shoes. An A4 is a nice example of a standard.
Yeah.
Containers on ships.
Yeah.
Containers are standardized, otherwise you would not get them from a ship, on a train or a truck.
Yeah.
So you need to standardize not only the container, but also the ship, the train and the truck are standardized.
Okay.
So in many ways standards are used.
Yeah.
And the thing is, most people don't see the real use of standards because it's obvious. And sometimes if you reflect on it, you have standards, I would say you have standards everywhere.
Yeah. So Johan, NBN, you say, is a publisher of these 40,000 standards. What does that really mean? How does NBN work?
Actually, NBN is a pretty small organization. We are about 20 people, but we have outsourced a lot of our activities to sector federations. And that makes us more agile. Our role is to make sure that standards are developed in Belgium and that standards are used in Belgium. Right. So I might perhaps explain how standards are developed, because that's an interesting point and an important point, because it's not just let's sit together and let's develop a standard. There are really processes and procedures to make standards trusted documents, trusted knowledge, I would say. And so there's a whole process behind developing a standard that makes this standard a credible, trusted document. So we bring together experts. They work together at different levels, Belgian level, European level, international level. And they come together, they create a document, and then the countries can vote on the document to make sure that the document, the standard, the piece of knowledge we have captured is accepted in each country. And there's a whole procedure of voting, a bit like the United Nations perhaps, right? But to come in the end to a standard that has been accepted by a majority of the countries participating in standards development. So we represent Belgium, and we make sure that Belgium stakeholders, and mainly companies of course, accept the standards we are developing at an international level. And that makes it a trusted document, that makes it a trusted knowledge.
And so as a publisher, you have explained me, you have the 4 different steps. Creation is the first step, and then you have create, use, learn, and share.
That's an interesting point actually, because as I said, I inspired me on the SEKI model in knowledge management from Nonaka and Takeuchi. The SEKI model is about knowledge management at a company level. I have translated this to a macroeconomic level, because we are there for companies, we are a macroeconomic actor, right? And we capture the knowledge, right? And that's the create part. We capture the knowledge and we create the standard. We combine the knowledge, because we have a catalog of 40,000 standards. So we help companies finding the right standard. That's the use part. The learn part is, again, make sure that the standards we have can be used by companies, by people in the field, in production, right? And then in the SEKI model, the first letter actually is S, socialization. What we do is also, apart for creating the documents, we have experts that come together. They are a network, and that's the socialization part. Experts exchanging information on their knowledge, on the standard, on the information they have.
Okay. So you're really active in the creation part as well. Huh? So because the standard by definition is almost international, always international, right?
Well, that's an interesting question. Actually, in the past, we had only Belgian standard, I would say. But with international trade, and especially with the European Commission, with the free trade of goods and no borders, we want to make sure that companies can use the same standards throughout Europe. Yeah. And you can imagine that, let's say we are 35 members in Europe today. If every country would have its own 40,000 standards multiplied by 35, it would be a nightmare for companies to export to other countries. Now we have a beautiful system. We create a standard in Europe, and we withdraw a contradictory standard in Belgium. So we have one set of standards for all Europe. Yeah. And that makes trade much more easier. Yeah. If you produce tables, you can create one table for all Europe. You don't have access limitations to other countries because your table does not conform the national standard of Romania or Poland or Germany.
Maybe a good analogy or a bad analogy or a bad example is electricity plugs. That is still different in every European country. And we know the pain that you have if you travel around and you need to have your adapters and so on and so on.
That's a good example. Thank you, Hendrik. And I would not say we are perfect. There's a long way to go still. There are a lot of needs in standardization. And indeed, there are some reasons why we cannot achieve standards or standardization. Electrical plugs, for example, is one example. Though we are moving in a good direction, but there are also, it might surprise you, but sometimes there are some cultural aspects to standardization because the uses, how people do things in certain countries can be different. In construction sector, for example, you see that in Holland, for example, houses are constructed, built, even if you use the same materials, the concept of a house in Holland might be a bit different than in Belgium. Yeah. It has to do with the sizes of the windows, how pipings, you put them in the interior or the exterior, for example. So it can be different in some countries. And I would say it's more about cultural and the habits of people in certain countries.
But the more, I absolutely see the point, that the more things are standardized, the better collaboration is. I mean, just imagine that the trains would still ride on different sizes of tracks that then they would have to stop at the border. That was not the idea. So let's talk a little bit more about standards in IT. What are there the most important ones and how are they used today?
I believe there are a lot of standards in IT. A few hundreds, I guess. But for me, there are, I would say, two categories. You have IT management standards, like the ISO 27001 and the whole series about the basics of information security towards cybersecurity or other areas. And then you have more the technical standards, I would say, really at a technical level. Of course, and I'm aware of that there are many different standardization bodies in IT also. There's not only ISO, right? Well, IT developers, users, innovators have to choose the right platform for developing standard. But ISO, I would say, is on a global scale the most credible and largest platform for developing standards anyhow, also in IT.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about ISO. I understand there's, 166 different national bodies that are part of that, and you're a member of the council as well. How does that really work?
Well, we are a member of both CEN and ISO. CEN mainly to develop European standards, and ISO to develop standards at a global scale. And which standards are developed where has mainly to do with the international dimension of standards or the European dimension of specific requirements, like European legislation that requires standards for example, the CE marking. It's about protection of customers, protection of the environment, and areas where we have CE marking are, for example, toys, are electronic devices, machine safety. These are really European legislation where they refer to European standards and where ISO standards, international standards, are not at the right level.
Yeah.
So we set the bar higher in Europe in certain areas,
okay.
but in our other areas, we collaborate on a global scale.
Okay. Now, we're here in CIONET TV, and so our audience is IT leadership, digital leaders, CIOs. Why do CIOs and IT leaders, why do they need to be concerned about standards?
I perhaps would not say concerned, but interested. Because, as I said before, you have standards at the management level. And I think every manager, every CIO should be aware of certain aspects of standards and how standards can help their organization, be it information security, but I think in IT, green IT, environmental management, for example, can be important. Health and safety, you might say in IT it's perhaps not that important, can be, but for each manager to decide what is important, of course. But we have standards at the management level, and they can bring insights to IT managers. And of course, depending on the industry where you are, it's important to see which IT standards are used. And a third area, I would say, is more in the area of innovation, because what we see is we get more crossover standards between classical industries and IT.
Could you give an example?
In the construction sector, right? Smart buildings, where you get a crossover between environment, products in building, but also use of IT to make the whole thing smart. Smart textiles, for example. So I think the future is also the more, and that's what we see actually, with joint committees between different areas, because in innovation, we cannot stay with classical industries in vertical silos. We see that, and especially IT, we see especially IT taking a part, a role in different, I would say, classical industries to make things more smart, Internet of Things, and etc.
Okay, you mentioned sustainability as a top on the agenda of most organizations nowadays. I mean, the general awareness has been created. Companies, large companies are really working on their strategies and on their net zero targets and so on and so on. Could you give us an idea how, what kind of standards are available in the area of sustainability and how they are being used?
There are a lot of standards about sustainability. And if today you talk about sustainability, I would talk about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes.
And with ISO, we have done an exercise of mapping the ISO standards to the SDGs. There are 17 SDGs. And where you see that in some areas there are not so much standards, right? But in certain areas, there are a lot of standards. If you have the area of where innovation, for example, there's an SDG about innovation and business, of course, a lot of standards. If it's about CO2 reduction, there are a lot of standards. If it's about clean water, there's a lot of standards in that area. Waste treatment. So in certain areas in the SDGs, there are a few hundred standards, in others less, of course. But I would say in general, in each SDG, there are standards. So standards are a tool for me to help companies to implement the SDGs, because that's what we see, and that's a difficulty for many companies. Well, yes, we have the SDGs, it's a high level thing, but how as a company will I implement the SDGs? Well, I would say standards are a tool. It's not mandatory. Pick the ones that are important for you, but they are a source of inspiration and they're a tool to implement the SDGs.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about your organization, NBN, here in Belgium. So you are leading this now for more than 10 years, right?
10 years.
10 years.
A bit more than 10 years.
So we just celebrated your 10 years, I can imagine.
Thank you.
And so tell me a little bit about the culture and the organization style of NBN. Like you said, you work international with a lot of different bodies, you work with the industry and so on. So how would you describe the company culture of NBN?
When I arrived at NBN 10 years ago, actually we were more as a, I would say, reactive organization. And we have developed a strategy in 2013 to make NBN more customer-driven. My focus when I arrived at NBN was making NBN more customer-driven and geared towards value creation. Value creation for our customers, for our stakeholders, but also for ourselves from a financial perspective. And so you had to change the direction of the ship towards another way of working, actually. And that's where we actually, and I'm very interested in your question and in organizational culture, because for me, culture is the behavior of people. There are different definitions, hundreds of definitions, but for me, the simple definition is that culture in an organization is a sum of the behavior of the people. It's what customers and stakeholders see. If you pick up the phone, how long it takes to pick up the phone, how you are welcomed, how you write your emails, for example, that's also about culture. And where we are today, I think we have huge difference with 10 years ago. I think today we are more customer-driven, more geared towards value creation. We have worked on process efficiency, and a bit I would say, in the philosophy of the balanced scorecard, it all starts with competence. You need a competence and competent people to have efficient processes, to be customer-driven, and to create value.
Okay.
Actually, as I said, the culture is the behavior of the people, and that's where it all starts.
So you mentioned customers. Who are really the main customers of NBN?
We have different kinds of customers, especially if you look at organizations that are using standards. We have different solutions, by the way. We have a web shop where you can buy standards, but we have also SaaS solutions where we give access to a library of standards to the company on a fee-based model. And we have a lot of SMEs using standards and a lot of large organizations, being multinationals to also public administrations who use standards. So we have different kinds of companies and customers.
So I also understand that over the last couple of years there's been quite a transformation and a digitalization process of your business. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? What's the current platform that has been implemented, and what are the principles behind that?
I think it's important to also shed some light on the history of our IT. Actually, we come from, and since 10 years, we had an architecture which was based on open source, which is fine, but for us, with a small organization and a very small IT team, it's difficult to manage open source technology, because if you're not careful, you have different technologies, you have different kinds of databases, different programming languages you use. And it's difficult, again, it's about the people, it's difficult to have an aligned approach towards these things, also for hiring people, the right skill set. Because today you develop applications in PHP, tomorrow in Python, and the next day in another. First, it was difficult to have an aligned approach. And therefore, we made a decision 2 years ago to move towards Oracle, because it's more straightforward. And we analyzed it, and we made, I would say, analysis of the possible solutions in this IT architecture alignment exercise. And for us, Oracle was the best fit. And we believe that it will reduce our total cost of ownership of our IT, I would say, architecture even.
So you made a shift from own development into more standard platform based on Oracle. So I also understand that low code is an important practice nowadays. Can you talk a bit about that?
Indeed, low code has, I think, was for us the way to go, because in our business, what we want to develop for our customers, it's not that complicated. It's just front ends. We want to develop that disclose the content in databases, right? So as a publisher, you have a lot of content, and you want to make this content available to your users, actually. It's very simple at first sight, of course. I believe the IT people in my team will say it's not that simple, it's more complex, but I'm a simple guy, so for me everything is simple. We have a lot of content, we have more than 40,000 standards and metadata, and we have to manage that content, we have to publish the standards and make them available with the front ends. And for developing the front end, it's not, we don't want to use or develop complex front ends, it's very simple. It's find standards and download standards, use pieces of the standards. So we are really based on the front end we have chosen for low-code development.
So Johan, you've implemented a more customer-oriented culture, a more value-driven culture over the last 10 years. And you've implemented a new, together with your team, a new platform. So where do you spend most of your time these days?
Hendrik, it's an interesting question. I generally don't think about this, but if I reflect on it, I think before answering your question, it's important to say that it's about developing a good team. Because if I have a good team, I have more flexibility and I'm more relaxed in spending my time in what I need to spend. So we have a very good management team now and a good staff team. Which makes it possible for me to spend my time more at, for example, international activities, ISO Council, some meetings I'm also active at the European level in steering the European standardization, steering the ISO international standardization. And of course, I'm still interested in certain areas, but I've got good people in different domains, so I trust them. And for me, trusting people makes sure that I can spend the time I need in the really areas that are needed for me.
So you have your organization is well organized, you have a good management team, good staff. And so what I'm interested in is really to understand a little bit more your leadership style, because managing is one thing, organizing things, but leading is another thing. How would you describe your leadership style?
I think I'm a positive leader, if that means anything, anyhow. But with positive leader, I mean that I have a lot of trust. Again, it's a people thing. If you recruit the right people, you can hand them over some responsibilities and you can trust them. So I'm a positive thinker. I trust people. I give a lot of responsibility. I want people to take responsibility. To create an agile organization. That's important, I believe. An example I can give is in that thing of creating responsibility for people is I don't work with job descriptions. I don't want it. I just want, I create roles. We have different roles for different people. And in the roles, I have responsibilities, right? But how you fill in these responsibilities, you get the tools, you get the budgets, you get whatever you need to fill in your responsibility, right? But I'm not interested how you do the things. I'm interested in you're responsible for a certain area and you deliver and you create results. But therefore, you need trust. I'm not a micromanager. I just say these are the roles, responsibilities, and we deliver. We deliver for our customers, we deliver for our stakeholders.
If I would go to your team tomorrow, Johan, and I would ask them and talk to them, what do you think they will say about you? And what do you think they say to each other at the coffee table when you're not around? How do you think they are perceiving you as a leader? The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Okay, interesting. I would tend to say, ask them, but I mean, they're not here. I think, and that's a bit how I see myself, of course, also. But my strengths are, I'm a kind of a creative person, innovative, perhaps a bit visionary, of course. Looking to the future, looking forward, more strategic thinking. This is the good. I guess the bad would be, and I acknowledge that. I know that from this is my weakness. Is I'm not a person interested in administrative tasks. I know that. My colleagues know that, so not a problem. This is a bit who I am. Again, what I said before, I give a lot of trust to people.
Yep.
And I try to make the people also create a future for the people also. One of the things when I recruit somebody, what I say is your role, you have the roles and responsibilities, your role has been defined for 80%. 20% create the role for yourself.
Yep.
Create for yourself, for your career, for your job, for you as a person, create your own opportunities within the organization. Of course, within the strategic perspective of NBN.
Yep.
There are opportunities for people to develop themselves and create new activities, new roles, new ideas. So, as a creative person, I expect all NBN members to be creative also and to be engaged also, of course. Yeah. I'm also a very engaged person about NBN. I come from the consulting business. I started 10 years ago, as I said, at NBN, which was new to me. But the more I am within standardization, the more I think exciting it is, because you are confronted with the international dimension, with the economic dimension, with companies, with customers. Yep. There are some financial aspects, of course. Technology is a huge driver for us to move forward and to create opportunities. So I'm very excited about NBN and about the opportunities we have, not for ourselves, but to help customers, to help companies in Belgium, mainly.
Johan, we live in special times. There's a recession around the corner, there's huge inflation, there's a supply chain crisis, there's an energy crisis, and consumer confidence is very, very low. There's global instability, there's war going on. Many, many challenges for organizations today. What do you see do you see any impact of that on your business, on what you are doing today and how you help your clients?
I would say we're not there to change the world, to be frank. We are there to help companies and to help economies to perform better, to create efficiencies, to solve problems in value chains. I don't claim we are there to change the world. We have not that ambition, to be frank. But what I do claim, actually, and not for NBN, but for standardization and standards, is that we simplify the world. And that's, I think, especially in troubled times, I think it's very important to create stability. Standards help to create stability in value chains. And that's our role. So we will not solve the large world problems, but we can help to provide the tools to solve the problems. Be it, we discussed earlier on about sustainability, climate change, net zero, these things. This week we have published for free a standard on net zero that companies can download for free. Most of the standards you have to pay for, sometimes, especially if it's something which is societal very relevant today, COT with the COP27. We have made the net zero standard available for free. So to show that we have a role to play, again, we will not change the world, we give the tools to change the world.
Okay, super. By the way, Johan, we have a conference in 2 weeks on the race to net zero. Maybe we could distribute that standard in that conference. Maybe good.
I'd be happy for you to do that.
So, Johan, what is it that really drives you as a leader, as a manager, as the chairman of the executive committee at NBN, when at the end of the week on a Friday, late afternoon Friday, when you go back home and you say, this was a great week?
Again, a question I don't reflect upon, but I'll tell you something different if I can, if I may. In the recruitment process, when I started 10 years ago at NBN, one of the questions that the recruitment committee asked me, what is your ambition? What do you want to achieve? And the answer for me was simple, and that's me. That's me, of course. I want to create an impact, to have a legacy, to leave something behind that is worthwhile, not only for the organization, but as I said, standards are tools for companies and for an economy. So where I can create an impact, and that's for me. I don't look at it as a daily or a weekly thing. For me, it's the long term. I'm really, from a strategic perspective, I'm thinking long term. And for me, it's important to create an impact. What that impact will be, I cannot say today. No. But we want to, each time, with innovative solutions, with our customer-driven approach, we want to create an impact in the long term. And we see that, for example, that our customer base is growing. On an organic basis, but is growing. Our revenues are growing, and I can tell you also our customer satisfaction we have worked on has also grown over the years. Okay. So that's a kind of not perhaps the answer you would expect, but how I see things, and really I'm a long-term thinker. Yep. So for me, it's creating an impact in general. Yep.
So that's really clear that is what drives you. So Johan, so thank you so much for your time for this interview. And so I would like to end with the question: you have made quite a career in IT and business, now leading this important standards organization here in Belgium. Our videos are watched by professionals, young professionals, ambitious young people. What is the advice that you would give them? Things that you have learned in your career that could be interesting for them?
An advice, a few things I've learned in my career, if I reflect upon. Mm-hmm. One thing is, seize opportunities. Don't be shy about opportunities. But that's me, the positive thinker, of course. Yeah. But don't be shy about opportunities. I think it's important that one seizes opportunities. One thing, and that's more my DNA. Another thing I've learned throughout my career, and where as a person I've grown, I believe, is the people thing. Mm-hmm. I am not a people person, I would say. But I've learned throughout my career to be, and especially if you want to work with people, to lead people, you have to become a people person. Yeah. And I believe I'm not a perfect people person today, but I believe I've grown in that role, and people are important because, and especially in our business, it's about people. Yeah. We talked about culture, about teamwork, about being busy with customers. These are also people, of course, stakeholders. Yeah. So to take care of people, your own people, but also your customers, and the human side of business. Because, and especially in technology, sometimes we think perhaps more about the technical side, and that's the exciting part. Yep. But I think the exciting part is exciting, of course, but I think the human part, I believe, is the most important part. The human part in our job, the people part.
Okay. And on that note, Johan, thank you so much for your time. It was really a pleasure.
Hendrik, thank you very much.